Ladies and gentlemen, as part of the Jeremiah Show, welcome to It's Radio with TV's Tim Stack. Now here's the host of the show, a man who once helped Howard Stern climb out of a hedge after he finished spying on Rosie O'Donnell. It's TV's Tim Stack.
Yay, me, and welcome to my 1000th show this morning. No, I think this, what are we up to? Show Jeremiah, are we up to show 14, I think, 13? It's an empire. So thank you. Thank you for listening. That was Jeremiah Higgins, I referred to, our executive producer, whose idea this whole thing was. And Dr. D is here, and I have some great guests, Eddie Feldman and Dave Rygalski, who we'll get to. I just want to quickly tell the Howard Stern story because it's kind of like, it's like early Howard. I don't know if you remember, there was a time when Howard was, he won't care if I tell the story. And if he does, so there was a time when Howard was really obsessed with gay women. Like, it was just gay. And he had this thing about Rosie O'Donnell. Rosie O'Donnell drove him crazy. So we went down to, the guy, Jim Stein and Dave Morgeson, who I had on the podcast, who we did Son of the Beach together. We go to the Four Seasons Hotel to spend the day with Howard working outside. He loved being in the California sun. We worked outside. And all of a sudden he got word, it was like he was paying a bellboy or somebody, that Rosie O'Donnell was at the pool. And he had always heard that Rosie O'Donnell had really hot women. Maybe she does, I don't know. But he was just like, it was like a little boy at camp. Like, he became a little boy, like, I'm going to go spy on Rosie O'Donnell. And he doesn't want her to see him. So he crawls into this hedge that was by the pool. And it was one of those hedges where I don't know what the branches were, they were ficus or something. He crawled in, but then he couldn't crawl, like he saw what he needed to see. Oh, there's Rosie or whatever. Then he couldn't get out because the branches were keeping him in. So we had to, and he's yelling like, get me out of here, get me out of here. I'm done spying. So we had to gently break some branches and push branches away without cutting him. Anyway, he eventually got him out. We saved Howard Stern. We saved him for all of the world to listen to. So that's my Howard Stern, Rosie O'Donnell story. Anyway, my guests this week, we're going to start a drum roll. This is going to be the longest intro in the history of radio. Anyway, Dave Rygalski and Eddie Feldman are comedy writers and producers, both known mostly in late night and the variety world. Dave got his start on the Wee Willie Weber show. I'm just kidding. That's a Philadelphia reference. Nobody's going to get that joke except if you're from Philly. Hey. He went to Ohio University, worked on Late Night with David Letterman, moved to LA, worked for years on the Jay Leno show and the Tonight Show with Jay Leno. Eddie Feldman went to SUNY Oswego. I had no idea there's Oswego. I didn't know. It's always SUNY and Oswego.
Yeah.
That's my joke. But he's worked on Dennis Miller Live, the Showbiz Show with David Spade, the Emmy show. I want to hear about working on an awards show. And he did one episode of Law and Order, dun dun, which I want to hear about. Anyway, together, we're 2/3 of the way through your intros. Together, they worked on You Don't Know Jack, game show mistakenly hosted by Paul Rubens. We could talk about that. I love Paul, but wasn't the right show for him. The Orlando Jones show, The Magic Hour, that was Magic Johnson's talk show, and the Heaven's Gate of talk shows, the Chevy Chase show. So maybe we can talk about that because I actually have a story about that. Anyway, the longest introduction in the history of radio. Please welcome Eddie Feldman and Dave Rygalski. Yay!
Hey.
Yes. Nice to be here.
Hello.
Sorry. Yes, It took an hour to get to you.
That's all right.
Anyway, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. The three of us have been working on something that hopefully one day we'll sell. But you guys, I knew Dave, from Pumpcast, but and I met Eddie through Dave. But how did you guys meet? How I forget what brought you two together.
Me too. We forgot too. If you met Dave, maybe you can remember.
It was the Chevy Chase show. That was our
Yeah.
first. Though
right.
Actually, I was thinking about it when I was first in New York in 1986. I believe Eddie and I lived like a block apart from each other, but didn't know each other up on the Upper East Side. I was on 91st and First, I think. Where
and
were
I
you,
was
Eddie?
on 90th. Yeah, I was on 90th in New York. So yeah,
Yeah, one block away.
1 block away.
But you didn't meet each other till you got out to LA.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
And
That was on that show.
And that was on the Chevy Chase show.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, Dave, you were already hired. I got hired like a week before the show premiered, or 7 weeks before the show was canceled.
And I think we had 10 weeks of pre-production with the goal of getting 10 tape pieces in the can before we went on the air. I don't think we met that.
How many actual episodes of that show? I don't know if people remember it, but I kind of do because, well, first of all, Stern used to talk about it all the time, but then I was good friends with Harry Anderson and he was on the show. So how long was that show actually on the air?
29
6 weeks.
episodes.
Yeah, 29 episodes.
And it was really crazy, right? It was like, and I did a movie with him once. Chevy Chase. He seemed like an okay guy, but just he impressed me as being very insecure. That was the word that I came away with. Like he was perfectly nice, but needed a lot of attention. That was my take on him. But that was kind of like a debacle, that whole show, right? And unless you don't want to dump on it, if you don't.
I have no problem. He didn't show up until like 2:00 in the afternoon, and that was he called Letterman and asked for advice and how to do the show, and it was like the obvious thing was to show up.
Yeah.
When I originally didn't, I got passed over. I interviewed with him, and he went off on a rant about how The Simpsons wasn't funny. So that and then
40 years later,
they offered one of the writers they offered the job to passed on it, and I got hired. I can't remember who it was, but I believe they went on to be a writer on The Simpsons. They got an offer for The Simpsons instead of going to Chevy.
It made it funny.
And then
yeah, and I got. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Sorry.
You came in later.
Came in a week before. Well, a week before the show premiered, because I had been on Dennis Miller's first show, and that got canceled. And then it wasn't. They needed some writers, and I got brought in a week before, and that's when I first met Chevy. And but he and I, speaking of growing up, he grew up around Woodstock, New York, where I grew up. So we had a lot of common. We knew the area and things. And my quick take on it is he wanted to do a 5-night-a-week sketch show with all his friends, and they said yes. And then slowly but surely, they're like, well, we can't have that guy, he's too expensive. And they kind of pushed him into a typical late night series that he didn't want to do. And then apparently he found out, like, even if I get canceled, I get paid. So I think he had no motivation after that
to get canceled. Yeah, because Harry Anderson told me he was a guest on it, and Harry left show business. This is after Night Court for a little bit, and became a trained paramedic up in Washington, and then brought back Dave's World, and he's on that show promoting Dave's World. And he thought during the interview, Chevy was having a heart attack. Like he legitimately wanted the paramedics to come in. They came a commercial break, and he sort of went to somebody and said, "Look, I'm a paramedic. This guy's having a heart attack." So, and it turned out, I guess it was just maybe an anxiety attack or whatever. And anyway, but let's go back. Let's go back before the Chevy Chase show. So, and we'll just go back and forth. So, Dave, I know you went to Ohio University, and I believe somehow you got into the Letterman show, right?
Yes.
Not your first professional.
The Ohio University, for some reason, got a good reputation with the Letterman people. And I remember there was an article in the Post, the OU, the student newspaper. It was a profile on a kid that just had his internship. And I was like, oh, there's such a thing. So I figured out how to call and get an interview. I interviewed with Paula Needert, who turned out to be Chris Elliott's wife.
Uh-huh.
And
I didn't never was.
She was the sweetest woman in the world, and worked in the talent department. And I wanted to be a writer's department intern, but that wasn't open. So they put me in, they said, we've got a graphics department slot. And I was like, I'll do anything, just get my foot in the door. And
I'll interrupt for 1 second. You're really good at that stuff. Like Dave builds decks that are unbelievable. So anyway, sorry, I interrupted.
That's the first thing I got there. They sent me out with a Polaroid camera and told me to take pictures of steam coming out of manhole covers and grates. And it was for a bookmobile book that was cheap places to sleep for tourists coming to New York.
That's funny.
First Airbnb.
Yeah.
Hot Airbnb.
So then you did the internship. They must have liked you.
Yeah. And the thing about, I was just a fly on the wall, quiet, did what I was told, just filed photos for Ed Hall and Shecky, and they would use me in bits. That was fun because it helped pay for my room at the 92nd Street Y. And I had to leave because I had to go back to college to get my degree. They got me a job if I wanted to stay at Lindy's. I was going to be a waiter at Lindy's, which was the ground floor. So I do place. Yeah, because it was a hangout after the show.
Can't work at the show, but we got you a job at Lindy.
You can serve us.
You're the show, and you'll be bringing this takeout.
Yeah.
But I had to make money, so I went down to Jersey Shore and worked at a water slide as a lifeguard, and then went back to Ohio University for my final quarter. And I actually moved to California for a year.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I tried to get some PA work and stuff, and I don't know why I didn't go back to New York. I would have gotten hired at Letterman earlier. So it was just, let's see what's out in California. And went to New York in January of '86 and was working at Tower Records. And March of '86, they called and said the receptionist job was open. So hell yeah.
Oh, that's great. And Eddie, you were stand-up. You were a working stand-up. Was that your intro into show business?
Yeah, I started doing stand-up, and that's where, although I always liked to write, but there was no pathway that I knew of at that time to be a writer. So I got talked into doing stand-up, and I, was starting to do that really frequently, make a living of it. And, that's when I got booked to do some colleges with Dennis Miller when he was on Saturday Night Live, and that's what that period. But I had met him the night that he auditioned and got Letterman at Catch a Rising Star. He introduced himself to me and asked me, could you come watch my set? I'm auditioning for Letterman. And I'm like, yeah, okay. And then he got on that, and then he did Letterman, and then eventually Saturday Night Live. But, so that's how I first met him. And he was doing a talk show, and he asked me to write on it because I had, worked with him, and he liked my writing. Syndicated show? That was on yes. So that was on Tribune. It was 5 nights a week. Right. That was his first foray into that. When we all discovered that he's great at 1 night a week, 5 nights. He could not care less to be on the air 5 nights a week. 1 night. A lot of work. Well, you can see why that HBO show was so great because I remember the syndicated show. It's just so much work. It's an unbelievable amount of work. I once had an interview with Roseanne to be a writer on her show. And I remember my agent, who was Stern's agent, Don Buchwald, said, that show is never going to work. You have to be willing to work. It's sort of like the thing. Like, you got to kill yourself 5 days a week. It's 14 hours a day. It's crazy. Yeah, it's a lot. You got to be committed.
Okay, so then we're going to pick it up after that. After this commercial, I am talking to Eddie Feldman, who you can find at Eddie Feldman. And I'm talking to Dave Rygalski, who you can find at Ludwig Fauci. Is that a Beethoven meets Dr. Fauci?
Yes, I one of my many avatars at one point, I had a baseball cap with Beethoven's head on it, and I have a mask that was a sequin Dr. Fauci. So I took my picture with the Fauci mask and the Beethoven, and I was just like, all right, I'm Ludwig Fauci.
Okay, now it makes sense. That's an interesting look.
Yeah,
okay, we're going to take a break, and it's Radio with TV's Tim Stack. We'll be right back.
Okay, if we're ready, I will continue on in 3.
We play a clip, guys, and then we'll pick it up.
Here we go.
A website in England is claiming that more housewives are having adulterous affairs than they claim because the credit crisis is forcing their husbands to work longer hours. You, sir, at Pump 15 in Burbank. Yes, good morning.
Howdy.
How do you respond to something like that?
I work 6 or 7 jobs.
Do all of them have to do with looking like a member of the Beatles?
Yes.
Now, what about the guy in your car? It looks like he's a Beatle, too.
Yeah, we're on our way to a gig.
Now, which Beatles are you guys?
I'm Paul.
You're Paul.
I'll tell you the part of George Harrison.
Really? Looks like George's been eating at Subway a little too much lately.
Okay. That was a clip from Pumpcast News, which was a bit where we'll talk about, we might as well talk a little bit about that, but I also want to get Eddie into the conversation there on this. That's how I met Dave. I met Dave, and then we went on TV together. Like, he called me, and I got a call from the Tonight Show with Jay Leno saying, hey, there's a bit here we think you'd be right for. Dave, why don't you take over that part? Because that sounds fun. Let's do it.
The interesting thing, I pitched that bit on my first day back to Leno in 2005, which was after the Dennis Miller CNBC show was canceled that summer. And I came up with the idea originally while working on Dennis, and I wanted to do it in a gym at a TV in front of a treadmill.
That's good.
And we got canceled. I didn't get a chance to even pitch it. And I was in Jay's office looking across Alameda, and there was a Shell gas station there. And it just clicked in my head that, hey, put a TV on the monitor on the gas pump and have two-way reveal. And they went for it, built the thing. Like 2 weeks after that, Shell announced that they were putting TVs in their gas pumps for real.
Wow.
And you were the only person we considered. We were thinking of names, and Larry Jacobson actually said, hey, what about Tim Stack? Because of Dick Dietrich.
Right.
We thought you'd be perfect, and you were the only person we called. So
yeah,
you had the job.
One of those jobs that always worked out. And I always tell people, like, my easiest, most fun job was Pumpcast, because you literally go into a room, which was a little studio at NBC, and you just wait for people to come up. And then we got down to a system, and the big question was always, did they sign? Did they sign? Because they had to sign a release in order for the show to air. That was always
the one time that a guy really got offended. He came around to the satellite truck, which was hidden from the gas pumps, and opened the door. And I'm in there with the tech guy, and he's like threatening me. He was going to fight me. He goes, you can't just do that to people. And I'm like, dude, there's cameras everywhere. We could put a film of your daily life together if we wanted to put video of you from your bank to the grocery store. So
maybe we'll jump back to Pumpcast a little bit later, but I do want to talk about, like, and Eddie, I know you'll have a lot to say, but on this, but the politics of a writer's room. I've been in writer's rooms on half-hour shows, and there are some politics there, but it seems like in the variety world, there's even more politics. Is that a safe question in terms of getting your bits on the air and the voyage of getting them there?
Well, I would say, again, I haven't been in a lot of the scripted writing rooms, but some. You have to remember in the shows that like Dave and I did, there's a dictator, and he's called the host. So he gets to pick, or she gets to pick.
Right.
And what that does, it takes some of yes, you can try to get your own jokes and things, but when you have the host who says, no, I'm picking what I want to say, it really helps, because one of the keys to making these shows successful is if your host, and Dave can attest to this for Leno, can you look at 300 jokes and pick the 10 best? That makes the world of difference, as long as you're able to do that. And so, yeah, there's always writers, jockeying for position and those things in these other shows. But here you have one guy normally who's picking what he wants to say, and that helps, alleviate some of the politics.
And when he or she looks at the jokes, like take Leno or Letterman, do they know who wrote the jokes?
Yeah. You hand your jokes in at those specific ones. You hand your jokes in with your name on it. And Jay would, we called it dogs. He would put a D next to the jokes that he liked. And the one funny story, one of the monologue guys left before we started taping one day, and another monologue guy put the monologue together with all that guy's jokes on it and sent it to him, faxed it to him to his home. And he thought he had every joke in the monologue that night. And he was calling his family, and much to his chagrin, he might have had two.
See, I always found that to be like, if I was a dictator on a comedy show, like a variety show or a talk show, I would insist that I don't see names, because, and it really bugged me in my little time at Saturday Night Live that whoever was the writer dictator got their stuff up top, like early on in the table read, and there were names, and it became like so inside, as opposed to who wrote it. We don't care who wrote it. It's good. And I don't know. That's how I would do a show. But, I also know somebody now who's on a show that there's sort of a protector between the staff and the dictator. And that person is sort of siphoning material. I don't know. It's a tough world.
Yeah. I mean, Dave, I would say on the Dennis Miller, on the HBO show, we did keep them. We just collected and collated them and didn't really worry about who wrote what. I knew, but Dennis, it was more of, hey, it's a funny joke, or everyone contributes. We did it that way. And also in writing submissions, I found I didn't put names on there because a lot of comedians know other comedians, and then they kind of get biased. And so I would just put somebody a number, and when I would give my host stuff, I would just, hey, did you like this person or not like this person? I kind of like that, and we didn't really count. I could count, but I really didn't want the host to all of a sudden go, Tim Stack, I haven't seen a joke from him in in 2 days. Like, what? Yeah.
No, it's real. And you were talking about Jay picking jokes. And Eddie, you may have another example of somebody like that. Dave, I always heard there was in fact, Dennis Miller told me this, that there was sort of like a subgroup that would meet at Jay's house and go through jokes. Is that how it worked there?
And for probably the first 10 or 15 years, and Brogan was part of that.
Yeah.
But
that's
also
Brogan, who's a sort of a legendary comic within the comics world.
Yeah, and he still opens for Jay at the Comedy and Magic Club in Hermosa on Sundays. I'm trying to Chuck Martin. Is that
name? The show from long now, right?
Yeah,
that's gonna be next. After burning himself and cracking up a wheel out an iron lung, and you hear Jay does that with an echo.
He'll go on forever.
I interrupted.
So Chuck Martin, Jimmy Brogan, a couple other guys that were stand-ups would meet, not the writers themselves,
Right.
and pick out what he liked, and they always got attitude the next day. And Brogan would come in before rehearsal to go over they had the jokes would get typed up on index cards, and then they'd get put on cue cards once they picked the final whatever 30. So the staff was pretty much cut in half between guys who specifically wrote monologue jokes and then people who wrote the desk bits and tape pieces. So they could cross over if you had jokes. Everyone got a calendar of what the bits were coming up, and were invited to submit jokes for. And Eddie, I don't know if it was the same system you did on HBO, but I remember on the CNBC show, you would put out a list of topics to write jokes on, and the writers would give them, I think, to the assistant via email, and then they would all get compiled under the topic without names.
Yeah, I think I did that simply because it was the 4 days a week and trying to manage everything with a small staff, and it was easier to kind of pick the top stories so that people could kind of focus on the top 5 things of the day and then go about your business with some other stuff. Because otherwise it'd be like, I think we found that all the jokes would come in, you're like, hey, nobody really wrote anything on the top 3 stories, and we didn't, and it was such a quick turnaround, with a small staff, that it was, we wanted to get as much in about what was the news of the day as we could.
Right.
And I think that's why I did that.
And Eddie, you may have may relate to this a little bit, but Dave, you brought it up, is the monologue room versus the bit room. Did those two ever, were you as a bit person, were you allowed to write monologue jokes?
Yes. And I think I might have gotten 3 on in 14 years. But within the monologue on Leno, we had short video clips that we called drop-ins.
Right.
So those were news related or topically related, and they're 10 to 15 seconds long, where you're green screening somebody in whatever news clip was worthy.
Right.
So those were fun to do.
And then Eddie, did you ever work at? I'm guessing the shows you worked on, you did both. You did because they weren't as big as Leno.
Yes. Yeah. So we did both. Like, that was really, so if it was Chevy Chase, yes. If it was Dennis's first show, yes, we'd write stuff. And then sketches. I remember the first sketch on TV I did was almost like a Bill Nye science guy. I wrote it up, and they were like, okay, that's great, you do it. I'm like, I do it. And I'm like, yeah, you should do it. And it was me doing basically the same science experiments I did like in 5th grade. But the difference, I'm like, I don't know that I'm an adult. And so I would wear like a snorkel mask instead of a protective mask. I had an assistant who was on the cover of Muscle and Fitness magazine, but I didn't notice how sexy she was. So I did like a month of those.
Wow.
That's funny.
Yeah. So it was kind of, it was before Bill. Then I saw Bill Nye. I'm like, he stole my act. But,
So it was like,
so we did both.
Bill Nye, but with a sexy girl who you didn't care about.
Yeah. Well, yes. So and everything was double entendre.
Right.
So it would be like, well, today we're going to study friction. Do you know what friction is, Bobby? No, I don't. Oh, it's basically could not be done these days.
So it's like my mind is going back to Johnny Carson with the tea time matinee lady.
Yeah, matinee. Yeah, it was like that. It was literally. I went to the talent person cower prop, and I'm like, I need an assistant for this. So, a girl, a female, and so she brought back the cover of Muscle and Fitness magazine and goes, will she work? I'm like, yes, I think so. Hey, I like TV. I see how this works.
First casting couch.
So we're going to take another break into our second half. I'm talking to Eddie Feldman and Dave Rygalski about their really successful and long-term careers in late night and variety, and now doing other stuff. Again, Eddie at Eddie Feldman for Twitter, and at Ludwig Fauci for Dave on Twitter. And I also want to plug Sprung on Amazon Freevee, the show I worked on that we're still waiting for season 2. Hopefully we'll hear soon. Otherwise, it's like, okay, we're going to move on. But we'll be right back in a second. It's radio with TV's Tim Stack.
Okay, ready? Here we go.
Now, this is just one comedian talking to another, but you undoubtedly have the best timing I've ever heard of a comedian in my generation. I mean, you stun me. Yeah, I just have to tell you that from a technique standpoint. And nobody makes me laugh as hard as you with timing jokes. Fine.
That was a bit from, I think it was maybe it was Dennis Miller Live, but Don Rickles was on. It plays better visually because Dennis is complimenting him about timing, and then Rickles just goes, fine. So that's interesting. I didn't know that you had met Dennis, Eddie, in the stand-up world. For some reason, I thought you came back, I don't know, later on. I thought that's how you met, but you met that early on before he was.
Well, yeah. It was I'm at the bar, Catching a Rising Star, and this guy standing there, and we, that's where all the comedians hung out. And he said to me, he goes, "Are you a comedian?" I'm like, "Yeah." He goes, "Oh, hi, I'm Dennis Miller. I'm auditioning for Letterman tonight. Could you come in and watch my set?" So it was years later that we got teamed up to do these colleges. And I think what happened was we were sitting around, and we hit it off pretty well, and we're having dinner or something, and I mentioned a joke, and he was like, "Hey, that's really funny. I'm on Letterman this week. Could I use that on Letterman?" And I was like, "Well, I'm not on Letterman, so go ahead." And it was after that, and he did the joke, and Letterman repeated the joke and things, and he was like, he goes, "Oh, I'm doing this show. I already have my writing staff, but I'll pay you if you want to stay in New York." And so I'm like, "Oh yeah, great." So I wrote in the morning. It was maybe like a week and a half in. One of the writers wasn't working out. I was getting quite a bit of stuff on, and then he's like, "Hey, could you come to New York?" And come to LA, and I moved overnight and started working. Flew in on Sunday and started on Monday, and so just started up.
And did you ever, when he was on Saturday Night Live, did you ever cross paths with him then? Because it seems like it would have been perfect on that show writing for him.
Yeah, well, I never did. I mean, no, I think I ran into him in the clubs a little bit, but he didn't remember. No, I never did. We just never hooked up there, and I didn't know how to submit to Saturday Night Live at the time, so it just never worked out. It just happened to be kismet, when we were doing stand-up together.
So I had asked you guys before, and don't worry if you didn't come up with anything, but I was thinking of a bit came to my mind from Nightstand, but is there some crazy thing that happened during a show, that just sticks in your mind? How did that happen? Anyway, in any of your memories, has anything come through?
It's funny you mention it, because the thing from Letterman that happened during a taping of the show, they recently just posted on their YouTube channel a clip of it, and that was when Crispin Glover kicked Dave or threw a karate kick. Yeah. And what's funny, before we started taping that episode, I was in what we called the airlock between the hallway and the studio, and Crispin Glover was out in the hallway, and he was dressed in the platform shoes and polyester plaid pants. And Dave, I remember him specifically looking out and seeing Crispin and saying to either Morty or Barry, I can't remember who was the EP at that point, "I sense hijinks afoot." It was the exact phrase that he said. It's burned in my memory. And he read it right. He knew something was going to happen. And they went to commercial, and Crispin missed out on his second act. They bumped somebody else up. So that was.
I forget how Dave handled it. It was clearly super uncomfortable. Did he actually have contact with Dave?
No.
but it was
And,
really uncomfortable.
Yeah, and if you watch it again, it's very obvious that Dave had no idea what was about to happen. That was all improv on Crispin Glover's part. And I remember afterwards he was like, "Oh, I thought this was the kind of show you could just do that sort of stuff on." And I think he was regretful, obviously, but
No, that's
I'm
career.
sure he did back.
No,
on
no,
at
yeah, I
some point.
remember that. I remember the fallout from that.
Yeah.
That well.
Eddie, anything come to mind with
Well, I mean, there's, nothing like that. I remember one time we did have a guest. There was a French actress who I haven't heard about in a while. Her name was Audrey Tattoo. And if she,
remember the name?
this was on Orlando Jones, where she came to the show. She's in her dressing room, and then she refused to go on when she was introduced. And so we have a guest in there. She's billboarded, and she would not go on. Got scared and wouldn't go on the show. And we're trying to fill the time, and so we had one of our producers, actually Michelle DeVoe, actually spoke French, could go in and speak with her, but we couldn't get her. She never came on the show. She came in, she got hair and makeup, and she just sat in the dressing room until the show ended, and then she left.
Thank you. That was a great show.
Yeah, it's like, yeah.
That was a great
So
show.
it just wouldn't go on.
That almost feels like a bit
Yes.
plan that you were
It
gonna
would be.
just
It would.
talk to her through the door with
Yes.
Michelle DeVoe doing the voice.
It's like
Yeah,
a Dr. Strangelove, but on a talk show, kind of like
Yeah.
Michelle.
I forgot about it till you mentioned something. I'm like, oh yeah, it was a weird. But that was the one thing I'm sure they will say is that's the thing with non-scripted late night show is, you walk in a studio and it's like there's a list. There's no script. There's nothing. You have jokes, but you go in at 9 a.m. and at 5 o'clock there's a show and there's people and they show up and it's like, okay, now we do it again tomorrow. It's not like, oh, we're going to reshoot it. It's like that's what this is.
It's funny because the one time Dave and I were talking about it last week was the one time that I was on the Johnny Carson show with Johnny, was part of the Groundlings. It's like that kind of stuff just never went on. That show, you talk about a dictator, like we were basically told, if you see Johnny, don't say hello. Like, don't say, hey, Johnny, like, come on. Look at just, and it wasn't like he was a bad guy. It was just, don't look like this show operates. It's like diamond cutters, how this show operates on a schedule and timing. And you get the feeling like Crispin Glover would not have kicked Johnny because there was an irreverence to David Letterman. Maybe he thought that. And Jay Leno, my experience there was just, it was so much more loose and friendly and amiable than Johnny is. But Johnny was like, everybody was uptight because Johnny might be in the room, Anyway, I was thinking of a crazy thing from Nightstand where I thought my career was over. It was our second show. We did the pilot and then we're taping the next show. So we've sort of been picked up at this point. And we did a bit where, on talk shows, they'll somehow have a mystery guest and they'll disguise the voice and they would put them in silhouette behind something. And and you'd have, yes, I was in the mafia. And, when you see the silhouette of the person. So we did this bit where this girl was in the silhouette. So you saw her perfectly, but we disguised her voice by sucking on helium balloons. So it came out, it was a stupid, funny bit. We didn't think anything bad was going to happen. Well, it turns out, I didn't know this, obviously, if you suck enough helium, like you reduce the oxygen in your body. So on the silhouette, this girl's doing the voice, but it's on the silhouette. She's doing the voice, and all of a sudden she collapses. But it's on the silhouette. So I'm going crazy, and all I'm seeing is like, I finally get my own show on the air. It's been 25 years or whatever it was, and this woman just, like, I'm thinking she's dead, and this show is done. Anyway, she got up and we reconfigured it and changed the voice and everything, and she mimed taking the balloon. Anyway, yeah, that's crazy stuff. So how we doing on time, Dr. D? We good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we're good.
The similar thing happened on Letterman in rehearsal when they did the suit of Alka-Seltzer, and
Yeah.
Steve O'Donnell, the head
Yeah.
writer, wore the suit in rehearsal, and they didn't think about it, but all that whatever CO2 that's coming up out of the bubbles, Steve passed out,
Yeah.
and so they pulled him out, revived him, and realized, oh, good thing we didn't do that during the show and kill Dave. I think they put at least a snorkel on Dave so that he could get fresh air.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's go back to the careers a little bit. And you both, Dave, I want to talk, like, for a while you were at Leno and then you left and you came back.
Right.
How did that happen?
I left because I got offered the head writing job on the Magic Johnson show, the Magic Hour.
Right.
And that was a debacle for me. It was a tough show because it didn't have an identity. And Craig Shoemaker was the sidekick for comedy, but he was only hired like maybe 2 weeks before the show was going to go on the air. There was a guy there, Steve White, who was the sidekick on the pilot, and he was hired as a writer and on camera, but not sidekick. And he was a little bitter about that. He actually got Craig Shoemaker fired because he told the producers that he heard Shoemaker on the radio one morning bad mouthing the show.
Wow.
And but I got fired 2 weeks before the show went on the air, maybe a week before. All the executives, there were 3 EPs on the show, and 3 Fox executives assembled all the scripts we had for bits one night. And after I left, they sat in a room and read the scripts and determined that there was nothing funny about them. And they brought in another head writer the next day. But I remember Lon Rosen said, being in an incredibly good mood, and he was like, "Oh, we've got everything's going to be great. We've got the answer. We figured it out." And they figured it out was, we're going to bring Tony DeSantis in, and you'll be co-head writers, and you'll be the guy that does the tape bits. And I didn't know it was Tony. I just knew it was, well, we got this figured out. And I just packed a box up with my stuff and never went back after that. And had my lawyer dealt with it. And it was, those people that Magic was fine. But his EPs, and they were just backstabbers and
but then, so did the people at Leno, were they mad at you for leaving?
No.
Because you got a head job, so they respect.
Yeah. And I bounced around a bunch with Eddie on a bunch of stuff. The Orlando Jones show, You Don't Know Jack. And Eddie brought me on Dennis Miller's CNBC show, and I was there for at least a year. That was maybe a year and a half. And they pulled the show. I went back. I'd been friendly with Leno's people because I saw them on the lot all the time.
Right.
And Debbie Vickers asked me if I wanted to come back.
Oh,
and I said, sure. And they had to figure out how to finesse it with Jay, because Jay actually remembered me as being maybe hard-headed and stubborn, and he didn't need that. And so I pitched a bit to do as a freelance, where we called it Starbucks Theater or something like that. And we went around to Starbucks talking to people working on film scripts and collected actors and musicians and put together a little 5-minute bit as a trailer for a movie.
At Starbucks?
Yeah, we had a bunch of
fun. That sounds really
yeah.
So that got you back. Eddie, did you ever leave a show and like whoa, that was
and
not...
then come not willingly. It either played out or we were told to leave. But no, I never, never went and come back. I never did anything like that as I remember it. Yeah.
Right. And were you ever, well, you just sort of said it earlier, were you ever fired? I can't remember now if you said that.
Was I ever fired? Yeah, yes, actually, I was. I had to think. Yes, there was a show where I got paid and had to go, but that was because I'll keep the show remain nameless, but that was because the network did not want that show on the air.
Oh,
It was doing well, but they did not want the host on the air.
oh,
Yeah. So I don't want to say what the show is. You can probably figure it out. Look at IMDb. But that was one of the things of they put the show on the air without realizing the host's point of view. That was opposite one of their other networks that had the opposite point of view. And the two of the most powerful people in Hollywood, basically said, "No, one season and out for this. Bye." Start to dismantle it and get rid of it. So yeah.
so you weren't fired. You were just part of the group that got fired.
Well, no, I was because they the show was doing well, so they had my belief was get rid of the guy we don't want it on, and this guy will keep it on. So goodbye to you. We'll pay you out and go.
If
Go on your
this is
merry
the
way.
show, if this is the show that I'm thinking about, I believe we were in a commercial break during a taping when an executive came and whispered to you that this was the last episode.
Oh no, that wasn't that show. That
Oh.
was no, that was something else. No, this show ran its whole first year because politically they would not want to take that show off the air, but it was okay not to bring it back. So you can all figure it out. It's a puzzle. DM me and I'll.
The over under on when I go to IMDb after this show is
Yeah, that's right. You'll see. Yeah, it will be quite easy to figure out.
going to have everybody from that show on the next podcast.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm talking to Eddie Feldman and Dave Rygalski, two great writers who made their mark in late night and variety. We're going to talk more to them after the break. You can find Eddie at Eddie Feldman, and you can find Dave at Ludwig Fauci, which he explained why he came up with that. And we'll be right back. You're listening to It's Radio with TV's Tim Stack.
Excellent. And we have plenty of time. Here we go.
Bunk beds are a lot of fun, but there's the ever-present danger of tumbling out of a bunk bed, especially, for really dumb kids. So now you're going to rest easy knowing that your child is wearing inflatable safety pajamas. Here, let's take a look at them. That's right. Any sudden change in altitude triggers the air valve, leaving your kid as snug as a bug in a Navy dirigible.
That was a famous Letterman bit. Dave, were you in that? I can't remember. Were you on camera for that?
Not that bit. No. That was a wacky prop bit that those were usually extras, sometimes staff. I don't think I ever did any wacky prop appearances.
But you did. You sent me another bit where you were the voice. You were calling in.
I was one of the call-ins. Yeah, for a Terry Garr interview. That was which after I found that clip and I was like, why don't we do that more? Let's go to the phones.
Yeah.
There's the only time we did it. And it seems like it should have been a refillable bit during the guest segments.
Yeah, absolutely. It also reminded me, you can find the bit on YouTube, right, Dave? That
that was on my reel that I put together. So I don't know if they put it out on Letterman's channel yet. Maybe it'll make it when Terry Garr dies and they put together the
Terry Garr run.
The obituary reel.
It also just reminded me, like, how cute she was and sexy.
Oh yeah.
Just wow, what a star.
And we sprung that on her. We didn't let her know we were going to do that. We knew she's that willing to go along with things that we knew she'd be a good sport.
So we're going to talk about a bunch of side things here. I want to talk to Eddie about how he happened to write an episode of Law and Order, because I watch that show all the time because my wife watches it and I can look at the internet while she watches it.
Yeah.
I don't have to participate, but it's on all the time. All of them, all the Law and Orders. How did that come about?
Well, so my degree So my degree that you mentioned early on from Sunny, as we called it, Sunny Oswego, was in criminal justice. That's how I started. I worked as a caseworker with delinquent kids. That's where I was headed before I got into stand-up. So I too was a big fan. What's that? Exactly. Yeah. Well, you know, it's funny. I you know, working with delinquent kids, Drew Carey said to me, he goes, so you went from delinquent kids to stand up. He goes, that's kind of a lateral move. I'm like, well, yeah, it's true. So I was also a huge fan of Law and Order because it was very procedural like. I liked that and studied that. And I ran into two of the executive producers, Renee Bolse and Michael Chanuchin, at a Writers Guild function, a Emmy thing. And I was like, hey, I got to tell you, I'm a huge fan of Law and Order, but my wife complains I watch it all the time. And so they, you know, we were talking, and I was like, told them about it. I go, hey, if I ever come up with an idea, could I pitch it to you guys? They go, yeah. So I went in and pitched them an idea, and they go, yeah, we like that. Hey, let's write it, you know, let's do it. Why don't you do it? So I wrote the first one. Actually, I've written 4 of them. And so, so what I would do is on my break from Dennis Miller Live every season, while we were off, I'd write another episode of Law and Order, and they'd give me an assignment. So I would go in and finally got to use my degree, my criminal justice degree.
That's great. That's a great story because, you know, I just find it like you get locked in show business, you get locked into one category. And that's not a horrible thing because you can make a living and have a nice life, but you get locked in. But then the chance to go write something that's what you're not locked in on is such a treat. And it's, yeah. And I know, Dave, you wrote on the show Lucky, the show that, I have to be honest, replaced Son of the Beach, my show.
Oh, I didn't realize that. I thought they replaced the Michael Chiklis show, the cop show.
No, that was the big hit. That's what gave them the, okay, now I'm going to get mad. You got me started, Dave. Kevin Riley, Slowly I Turn. No. So, no, the show that replaced us was Lucky because it was a half-hour show. And so, but the Michael Chiklis show, what was that called again?
The Commish.
No, it was
it was the Bad Cop.
Yes.
Oh, right.
And that gave the executive at FX, Kevin Riley, the sort of the clout to do what he wanted to do. And he didn't like our show. And so he got rid of us. But they replaced it with Lucky, which I thought was a very good show. Billy Gardell was on it, and it
Greg
was
Robinson.
So you were kind of the same thing, except you were a staff writer on that show, correct?
Right. What did they give me? I had a title. I had a producer title, actually.
Okay.
And but they were friends. Mark and Rob Cullen created that show. 2 Philly boys.
Didn't know that.
Yeah. And one of my first jobs when I came out to LA in 91, 92, was working for ZM Productions, and Mark Cullen was a development person there. And we did a pilot for a Ripley's Believe It or Not remake with Dean Stockwell as the host.
Wow.
And it didn't get picked up. It was really weird. It was cool. It was like a theater in the round, and he was really weird, too weird to get the show picked up. But that's how I met Mark and Rob and got on that staff.
Gotcha. And that, again, it's fun to go, you know, what little I have with variety and late night, it's fun. And we're, you know, these projects now we're working on, we go like, just go off and write jokes. It's really fun, but it's also fun to write scripted material.
Yeah.
You don't often get to do both. So,
yeah, and see it happen. You know, the office was next to the stage on Sunset Gower. So you're working and pitching, and then you go down to the craft services to get some snacks and watch them shooting. And you're like, oh, there's a whole casino set up. And it's like, this is kind of fun. We could have a party night here and actually gamble.
Who was the star of that show? What?
John Corbett.
John Corbett, right? Who used to run lights at the Groundlings way back when?
Oh, really?
Yeah, like back in the 80s. Yeah, he used to run lights. He was a nice guy. I think he's married to Bo Derek now, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Did they get married eventually?
Maybe, or lives in San Diego. Actually, Dennis Miller, I think, is good friends. We keep dropping Dennis Miller's name today.
Bo actually was a guest star on one of the episodes. There was only 13 episodes, but they brought her in.
So I'm going through the IMDb thing again, and Eddie, and I see wrestling.
Yeah.
How did that happen, and what did you do there?
Well, I have my minor was in wrestling at SUNY. So I, like you, probably throughout your career, I would get calls from this headhunting group, really asking to say, hey, we're looking for an executive, TV executive, not calling for me, but say, do you know anybody? And I'd be like, hey, there's a guy over at Comedy Central that you should talk to, or there's a guy at Fox you should talk to.
Right.
So, and they're like, oh. So one time I get a call from them saying, hey, we're looking for a head writer for the WWE. And do you know anyone? And I was like, I don't know. I said, let me ask around. They go, would you want to talk to them about it? And I was like, yeah, sure. Because Dave and I worked on Orlando Jones, and the head writer for Orlando Jones was the head writer at the WWE during the Attitude Era. This guy, Tommy Blacha, worked at Conan, SNL.
The Attitude
would tell me
era, you like Rowdy Roddy Piper, that kind of.
Yeah. So Hulk Hogan, all that Attitude Era.
I'm going to get you in 2 weeks at Cleveland.
Yeah. And then he would tell me all about that. So when I'm like, yeah, I'll talk to them about this. And so I interviewed with Stephanie McMahon, like over an early Zoom or whatever that was.
Right.
And it was like, yeah, whatever it was, it really wasn't interested. And then they came back not too long later, and they said, there's another position available. It's a more senior position. We'd be interested now. And I go, yeah, okay. So they flew me out to meet Vince McMahon in his office. And I was prepped by Tommy Blacha about what to say, different things. And Tommy's take was, he goes, hey, with Vince, if he ever got mad at you, just make him laugh. You can make him laugh and it'll all go away. So I got there and ended up, getting the job as the SVP of creative over the whole thing, and moving to Stamford, Connecticut.
That's right. They're in Stamford, Connecticut. My parents were from there, so I always remember Stamford, Connecticut. And I knew a younger guy I worked with on Earl, Sean Conaway. Did you ever run across him?
Not that, but maybe, but not that I,
right.
I'm not sure what he did. Yeah.
So
it was crazy and just like you think, but it was fun, and Stephanie was my boss, and then her husband Triple H was my boss. So it was, but the whole organizational part of it, the TV part and everything, and the travel. So it was quite the experience.
Wow. Well, we have talked a lot today. Thank you both, guys. Thanks so much for coming on the show. This is really fun. As I mentioned, the three of us are working on a project, so a lot of what you just heard is what we talk about. We use that for a little bit, reminisce, and then work, which is, I have to say, part of the fun of writing on comedy shows is that you're gathered with people who are funny, and you spend a few minutes catching up, and then you start work. A lot of the shows that don't start work until 4 p.m. end up in trouble. That's my observation. Yeah. It's the ones that start about 10:15 in the morning. You gather at 10:15, you start work. Those are the ones that generally have some success. So,
yeah.
Anyway, thank you, Eddie Feldman at Eddie Feldman. Thank you, Dave Rygalski at Ludwig Fauci. If you want to check these guys out, they do funny stuff on Twitter, which I see all the time. Thank you, Jeremiah Higgins, my boss man. Thank you, Dr. D. Richard Dugan, the engineer. And thank you all for listening to It's Radio with TV's Tim Stack.